So welcome to our panelists. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get straight into the first question. The role of 3D printing, building information management, drones and robotics. Let's discuss the role of them in the design and construction industry. Who would like to take this question to start with?
I could go in.
Yeah, sure, please.
Right. So if we, it is quite interesting where we're going. Well, let me get rid of this, it's loud. Okay, so it's quite interesting how we're seeing the entire construction industry move ahead, and especially with these new technologies that we're talking about. We're talking about drones. We've had a few sessions earlier in the days on what's happening from a drones and an artificial intelligence point of view. The most exciting or the most live to market technology out of all these that you just mentioned is really the BIM systems, and we're seeing them reach what's being called the seventh dimension. And that's really saying that, look, earlier buildings were constructed and they were being constructed where the focus was, the BIM systems focused on the construction data. And now we're talking about going a step ahead to the very end and trying to get them ready to take care of the facilities management, the entire operations of the buildings itself. And that's interesting because that aligns the construction process itself to efficiency and to the way things are going to get applied at a later date. And that's really if you ask me, that's really the time, the technology that's getting commercialized, yes. We also are seeing artificial intelligence come in from, evolving over analytics and being utilized. The other element that's going to probably witness a heavy adoption here in the region is 3D printing. It's beautiful. You can use a lot of recycled stuff. We saw Dubai Future Foundation come up and put a huge block of a building out there, which was ready to occupy. That's 3D printing. We can expect that to go further. And why I think that it's good is that it's going to allow for usage of more sustainable, locally available materials. And that's going to drive the sustainability element other than efficiency.
Okay. So you discussed, I know that BIM is quite widely used now. We've seen it in quite a few projects in Dubai. Some of the projects we're working on, they're using BIM, developing it during the construction stage, and then, like you said, continuing it for use during the facility management stage. What about drones and robotics? Are you seeing that in use in the region at the moment, or is this something that is perhaps still in the kind of R&D stage and might be coming into use in the future?
When we take a look at drones and robotics, they're not being applied here in the region, but we do see them being tested and trialed in a number of places in the world. We're seeing robotics being used, for example, for elementary things like painting walls. Simple process, hazardous, but you're seeing robotics being used there. Drones are interesting because along with, for usage in closed spaces in buildings, maybe, high-rise buildings here, drones can have a great application. And I think it's going to just come up. But the answer to your question, in this region today, we don't see drones and robotics being applied. 5 years from now, 3 to 5 years from now, I will venture a guess they're going to be extensively adopted.
I guess particularly like you said, for the high-rise, perhaps the cleaning of solar panels, that sort of thing, you might see the robotics coming into use quite a lot.
As well as inspection.
Yeah.
A lot of inspection work.
Yeah. Okay.
I think in Europe, this is more commonly used. You can see drones being used for modeling thermal losses of buildings, for example, where you have to do some analysis prior to retrofitting these buildings to improve their environmental footprint, to reduce their environmental footprint. So that is getting used more and more. I can see that trend coming to this region anytime soon. This is happening.
Okay, I think our third panelist has just arrived, who might also have some good insight on this. Benjamin Piper from Killa Architectural Design. Please join us. Hi. Welcome. No problem. Nice to meet you. Please take a seat.
No question.
So my apologies, everybody.
To put you straight on the spot, Ben. First question, which I think you might have some interesting input from Killa. I'm familiar with a lot of your work. Just the general role of 3D printing, BIM, drone and robotics, kind of these any of these disruptive technologies in the region at the moment, or anything that you see coming in the near future?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, UAE, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and the region is really renowned for pushing the envelopes of the scale and the methodology in the construction industry. And I think this new developments in scaling up what is actually a relatively well-established technology of 3D printing, but scaling it up to an architectural dimension is something that is quite unique. So at Killa Design, we were fortunate enough to be invited to take part in the construction of the world's first fully occupied 3D printed building. This was a small pavilion structure called the Office of the Future in the grounds of the Emirates Towers, which was a temporary operational center for the Museum of the Future, which is also a project that we're developing. And I think that this particular project was really a test case. I think that's very important to take theory and bring it into practice, because in so doing, sometimes there's a dilution of some of the principles, but there's also a better understanding of the real world sort of challenges, I suppose. And in this case, we managed to 3D print the structural concrete elements of the building. And this has some far-reaching ramifications in terms of material waste saved. It brings the construction process directly to the site, and in a way cuts back on the kind of global transportation footprint, you could say, which many of the buildings that are being built today really suffer from, because it's actually very rare in today's world that we build buildings from locally available material. It's really just to do with the kind of global economic situation. And just as I was in the car on the way up here listening to the radio, one Lebanese architect here at the conference was really talking about recycled materials, but also materials that are locally available. And that's what we're trying to do.
I think he sat right next to you.
Oh. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I guess what we take from that then is that 3D printing and BIM are already in use in the region, with drones and robotics kind of still in the R&D stage and perhaps coming over. We're seeing some use of them, like you said, Francois, in Europe.
I would like just to say one thing, that this technology also could be a double-edged sword, because it could take a lot of job opportunities for a lot of workers and people. So it should, we should be careful the way we use this kind of technology. So as usual, as we see during this last 100 years, technology did very good things, but also did very bad things. So we should always be careful about this.
But I think, having said that, I mean, if you look at typical construction sites in the region, there's this strange kind of blend of extremely modern and ambitious, but on the other hand, very old methodologies. And I don't necessarily think that sort of automated building production leads to sort of job losses as such, but it's really a potential to upskill the workforce. So instead of folks laboring in the heat of the sun, perhaps they're learning to program robots, maintain complicated mechanisms,
so
etc. There's a different workforce.
Be a program of deviating the expertise of a certain kind of people towards something else.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's an interesting one. We have seen it historically where industry comes in, or modern technology comes in and does replace people in the workforce. So, yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. So, considering the fact that some of these technologies are being implemented, some are not yet implemented in the region, what are the challenges, the main challenges that must be overcome? Who wants to take that one? Sure,
Well,
Abhay, please.
In my opinion, the way we look at it, and we constantly compare, as part of Frost & Sullivan, we compare what's happening in different parts of the world. I think the biggest challenge, considering 3D printing, robotics, AI, etc., is the standardization. You got a whole host of multiple vendors sitting out there, churning out products. You need to get them to align with each other and work under one single construction site, for example, or work over a period of the lifetime of a building. Getting them all to sit and work on a single standard, a single platform, interoperability is, I think, the biggest challenge. The second biggest challenge, in my opinion, is the regulation around them. For example, you got 3D printing coming in, and I was just giving the example of the Future Foundation project as well earlier, and it's impressive. But, the way we look at it globally, we're seeing a lot of environmentalists come in and say 3D printing can be better off if it starts using, for example, plastics that are recycled locally, or it starts utilizing construction material that was actually recycled or reused to whatever extent locally. So that regulation coming in, imposing for local content usage, for recycling, will go towards the theme of efficiency and sustainability. Mm-hmm. So to regulations and interoperability.
Yeah, and I think to build on that in terms of the what we find from certainly the Dubai municipality testing labs, they have the need for a whole plethora of new methodologies for testing, because of course the 3D printing concrete is entirely different from casting concrete in a traditional way. Yeah. But we're actually quite pleased to see how responsive the local authorities are being, and they understand that this is part of a vision for continued innovation and so forth. I do think one of the challenges of the construction industry in particular, and one of the reasons why it moves forward so slowly in technological terms when compared to other industries, is because of the tendering process. I mean, essentially, price is king in all of this, and it's very, very difficult to do genuine R&D that is also the lowest price and also the least risk. And when anybody is engaging in a building project, I mean, the main decision maker, more likely than not, they will take a lower cost option of less risk. And this is a significant slowing factor in the development of technology. So technology can be there, but the marketplace is not necessarily supporting that. And if you use a technology like 3D printing, you cannot necessarily competitively tender such projects because it's a very specialized process at this point in time.
Yeah, I agree.
And how do you think we can overcome that market barrier?
Well, look, I think there is in many parts of the world a great sort of tradition of government intervention where this kind of innovation is seeded, it's subsidized, and this is a very common model. It's less so common in the ultra-free market scenario that we have, here in the Gulf region. But I think governments are understanding the need to kind of help technology to leapfrog into common practice. So I would hope that conferences such as this and other sort of innovation incubators bridge that gap and really make new technological approaches to construction feasible from a market perspective as well as from a sort of visioning perspective.
Okay, and I think also to touch on that, probably raising awareness a bit in the marketplace as well of the benefits of such technologies like 3D printing, BIM, the drone and robotics technologies. Taking this as an opportunity to raise that awareness, what are the benefits, I guess focusing on sustainability, considering the theme of this conference?
In terms of 3D printing in particular?
Yeah.
Well, I think that as I mentioned before, probably the number one benefit is the idea of bringing raw material to the site and the processing of that raw material taking place there. So effectively, you're cutting down a huge amount of transportation cost, and also not only in terms of the transportation of material, but also in terms of different labor forces coming and going. And traditionally construction is divided into packages. You do your structure, and then you do your MEP, and then you do your interior fit out and so forth, your facade. But if you take this idea of completely coordinated design, which is only now possible because of BIM, essentially meaning that all of the issues within a building project can be resolved digitally first. It then becomes possible to essentially produce those components entirely independent of each other, whether in the factory, in an automated process, or on site. And when I say factory, I mean somehow relatively local, not on the other side of the planet and so forth, and then bring those pieces together. And it's only now that we're able to have that level of pre-coordination where you can really automate the process. Traditionally, such coordination would take place on site with a sort of improvisational manner. And the amount of waste that can be saved, the amount of time that can be saved, I think improving the sort of workforce conditions, I think, is also very important in that factor. And I think that as the population grows and the demands on our buildings become greater, we have to look at more efficient and speedy ways of constructing.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Also, to add on, I think other than 3D printing, I was talking about BIM, and you just mentioned about BIM as well. I think what's very interesting to see from a sustainability point is what BIM can actually deliver, and a lot of people aren't using it that way. But the minute you align BIMs to the actual duration of the project, to the duration of the asset. So you take a building, let's say you start analyzing it, or you start analyzing, say, past consumption data of energy and resources. Now you apply algorithms on top of it. And some would say it's analytics, some would say artificial intelligence to some extent. You start applying those algorithms on the data, and you use that data to start modeling what kind of material I use, what kind of design I need to apply. All right? That flows into the construction process, into what you procure. Okay? So you're now taking the BIM concept and allowing it to flow down into things like material, into construction, and applying it. So when you have a ready-to-use asset, it's from day one aligned towards efficiency. As of now, what we're seeing is very random implementations where someone would say, all right, I need an energy-efficient building. Let me look at the building direction and see if I'm getting the right light, or let me see if I can capture wind to some extent in the building design, but you stop there. You haven't gone and modeled on the basis of past performance data. Yep. It's all there today. Yep. So, if I go ahead, 3D printing, of course, is brilliant from a sustainable point of view, but I think going ahead, for this region, globally as well, looking at BIM, looking at the 7th dimension, bringing it all in is really critical to deliver the final package.
You will have certainty as well, that you can deliver the final package,
absolutely.
The quality of
because
delivery.
You're absolutely right, the quality of delivery. I mean, I've seen an implementation of, collaboration tools along with the BIM, where, all the vendors that you needed were classified as per construction codes. They're sitting there, you've got past performance data of the vendors, and then you're getting procurement on the basis of what they delivered. You have all the specifications sitting with you, so you got the as-built, sitting, you got spec sheets, what material was supplied by whom, was the spec data. So if something's going down, you just need to tap and pull up the data, and you know what to do with it. This is something that's been done a lot in the oil and gas industry, in the refineries in the past. Buildings, they never did it because it was cost prohibitive to do it. But now with things like, drones, with the BIM systems getting mature, I think we're seeing that it's easier to implement it in this. And it's useful because you got a whole range of SKUs, and multiple items sitting in a building. And you need to track them. You need to know what went in. Yeah,
I think at the end of the day, the architect in a way is responding to the site conditions, the brief, the environment, and so forth. That's the kind of a human role of the designer, trying to synthesize all of these different sort of constraints in the design into something that best balances those needs. And that is, there's a great power behind that. Now, with computational systems, we have the ability to analyze in real time those kinds of decisions. So if you decide to change the spec of the glass or reorient the building or try some louvers, rather than it being a kind of intuitive kind of sense which has been built up over a lifetime of experience, you're actually able to get real data on such decisions. And the idea that buildings can be responsive is very central to quality of design. But one of the challenges with a responsive building is that it can sometimes become very expensive, because rather, if I take an example of a flat slab is essentially designed for the worst case scenario, and as a basic simplification, the slab is made flat throughout, because it's actually too expensive to design a slab that subtly changes its depth depending on the forces that are occurring within it. With computational analysis tools that we have today, and with the fabrication tools that we are beginning to have, it starts to become possible to make that slab in a completely optimized way. So there's not a tiny piece of material that's a simplification. It is utterly responsive. And you can imagine scaling that up to the facade, to the roofing, to the water catchment orientation. And I think we have some really exciting building forms that will emerge from that, and we actually have feasible ways of producing such complex and responsive buildings because we have new forms of actually producing them.
Right.
So it's not really 3D printing on its own.
Yeah.
It's part of this whole new environment of tools and methodologies that's changing the industry.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's helping on selection of materials as well as the actual design and the kind of modelling of things. And I think that runs through as well into the operation of the building, continuing into the measurement and verification during operation, using the same model that was used during the design, during the operation of the building, being able to actually compare and capture when things aren't working as designed.
I mean, it's a really interesting point that you raise. I've never worked, unfortunately, I've never worked in any practice that's really had real world data fed back into the designs. And there's, the building industry as well is broken into, it's a hugely collaborative effort, and essentially we all have our little sphere of influence. But it's really by joining those spheres of influence and getting feedback. So it's extremely rare, unless you're working maybe with a big developer who has a big catalog of history and a best practice and things like that. Essentially, once you've finished a design, it's like your children have gone to university, now they're off into the wide world, and hopefully they'll do okay. But it's nice to get a call back every once in a while and maybe think about how to adapt future. Sure. And I think sensors in buildings giving real-time feedback to the people that have actually designed them, so that they get real data as opposed to perceived sort of influences would be great. And I look forward to that happening in the future.
Yeah. Okay, so that feeds us into kind of our next topic of energy and water efficiency during operation. So I think this would mainly focus on BIM, but also the robotics and the drones, if they're coming in at all into the kind of improving the efficiency during operation from the design to operation in terms of energy and water. So other than the kind of sensors and the real-time monitoring, is there any other technologies that we're seeing in the region to kind of enhance these?
I mean, I think the sensing technologies are becoming ubiquitous and affordable, and also don't necessarily need the expensive infrastructure of wires and conduit to link them up. And I think that's kind of an exciting opportunity. Where I live in Dubai, it's called the lakes, but we actually have coined the term the leaks, because even on my own street, myself included, many people have paid around 11,000, 12,000 dirhams to Diwa for some water pipe leaking in the ground, with no understanding of that's going on. And that's a tiny microcosm, and it's happening throughout the city. The water table in Riyadh is rising because of the amount of water leaking into the ground. So we have major problems with actually knowing what's going on in our systems. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for sort of real-time feedback. If I had had a sensor somewhere within that network saying something's going wrong here, it wouldn't have leaked into the ground for all that time.
Yeah.
And we can also integrate agriculture in this, because if we consider today's vertical farming systems to be able to feed cities, technology, high technology of sensors and particular kinds of gel for hydroponics and things like this would increase also the efficiency, would reduce the consumption of water a lot. So this kind of technology also would affect the economy of water in buildings.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially when you during the process of using the water in the building, you can divide the consumption of this water and by 3 or 4, like we're doing in Lifehaus. We use the gray water as the black water also for irrigation, and even in irrigation you use some technologies to improve the use of this water.
So you have like the moisture sensors and the
there is a lot
systems.
of startups here in Clicks who already have very interesting ideas, like for example a certain gel that absorbs water and the roots take their need from this water without having any kind of evaporation of the water, which reduce the consumption of water. And there's also like a sensor that you plug in that you insert in the plant that will do a whole data about the plant and follow up how much energy does it need, how much water, all things like this. So there's a lot of new technologies that can emerge that will help reducing the consumption of water.
Are you using that in the region, in here?
No, actually, these are like startups now. These
Okay,
are
yeah.
friends. So, but hopefully it would be in the market soon.
Yeah. No, that sounds great, definitely.
It's like the future
Yeah.
technology.
And Francois, you touched on as well the
Yes.
thermal imaging for
Yes,
the
I mean, in terms of
drones.
energy efficiency, I work for Tabreed, and that's district cooling. So cooling here in this region is quite an essential piece of infrastructure. You really need cooling in GCC countries. This is, I mean, you can't avoid it. Now, cooling requires a lot of power. It's energy intensive. During peak times, it consumes about 70% of the electricity produced in UAE, for example. On average, during the year, it's between 40 and 50%. What district cooling provides is a more efficient solution. We claim that we can reduce the energy used for cooling by about 50% against conventional cooling. We save 1.4 billion of kilowatt hours every year, which is the equivalent of 48,000 homes in UAE homes, in terms of electricity, annual electricity consumption. We also reduce CO2 emissions with our technologies. These are rather mature technologies, but of course there is always room for improvement. That's what we're trying to reach. We're trying to improve our operations. We're trying to improve design. We also work with developers to better understand the needs as well. Because our solution is actually cost effective, it's energy efficient, it's got a lot of benefits, but I think what we still need to do better as like all together between developers, designers, architects and us as cooling providers is to ensure that not only buildings are better designed, but we understand the demands of loads from these buildings better. So I think when we talk about new technologies to assess that and to build, so you will have better certainty on what you ultimately deliver and ultimately what you need and then what we can provide. So there is then a much better matching in terms of what we produce as cooling and what you need as cooling from us. So that's, I think, all of that is going into one single direction. It's all towards better efficient buildings, better efficient technology solutions for my sector, which is cooling, but of course it's valid for many other sectors as well. Electricity consumptions in buildings and so on.
Definitely, yeah.
But I just wanted to comment on that specific issue of district cooling and maybe just ask a couple of questions. One is, one of the problems that we have is that many of the projects that get built are on this sort of speculative model, where as soon as the developer has sold that unit, they're free of the responsibility, and actually the lowest capital cost wins, because there's no real incentive longer term. Maybe the market is getting more sophisticated. The other thing is that when it comes to district cooling, we've worked with developers who've said, we don't want to take the district cooling because we don't want to have a monopoly over us. And at some point in the future, they may change their rates and everything, and they rather build self-contained cooling systems at rather high cost, but for the security that at least they're in control. I wonder if you had any comments on those.
Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing this sort of comments over the last few months, effectively, since I've joined Tabreed. The fact of the matter is, what needs to work is clearly there is a need for proper contractual or regulation. I mean, proper contracts or proper regulation, and both, preferably. So the regulations need to be very clear in terms of whether or not district cooling is needed, or simply whether or not a building needs to comply with some certain regulations or certain kind of targets in terms of efficiency. District cooling aims to achieve probably around 50% of the targets. Like, for example, we've seen in the current RSB regulations being enacted. Now, on the other side, I think you touch point on the clarity of the contracts. For us, these are long-term contracts where we have 20, 30 years contracts with clients. So the rates can't be increased like for our convenience. That doesn't happen. At an end user, I would be very unhappy if that were to happen. This is not going to happen. There is a contract. This is on paper. This is This is contractual. This is completely an obligation on the provider to provide cooling at a certain rate, with some formulas like any concession in the world would have. But that's the very same principle. It should be like that. As far as we're concerned, Tabreed, our business model is built like this. We have thousands of end users, and the contracts are always the same. They're like on that basis. So there's no. There should not be any surprise if people read the contract. But also, I think one of the aspects, which is very important, is to understand the load of the client, because one of the criticisms that was made back in the day is that the rates are not adapted to basically the demand. Mm-hmm. But I think then it's a bit easy for me to do so, but then I'm probably blaming the real estate developer for like overestimating the demand, for example, or not making it like properly calculated, or his consultants not assessing it properly. So, and all of that is a bit secular. I think we just need to get something very tight where there is a very good match between parties. Yes.
And again, that's where we can see BIM coming into play.
Pardon?
Okay, so we've just got just under 5 minutes left. So a quick question left for all of you. What would be the technology that you most want to see being pushed into the market in the next few years? If we start with at that end.
A combination of 3D printing and artificial intelligence being pushed in. In my opinion, that's groundbreaking, and I'm going specific to just the 2 points that this forum was about. And you're talking about efficiency and sustainability. If you're talking sustainability, in my opinion, 3D printing can do a lot. I was yesterday at a waste forum talking about waste management and looking what can be done. I talked to people. There are real life cases of people wanting to relook at how plastics are handled here. How construction and demolition waste is handled here. And there's a fair bit of application where you can have raw material for 3D printing come in, and then all that raw material is locally generated and is locally delivered, and you cut down on transportation and things like that, which just means that you're becoming more sustainable per se, and that's one big thing. Again, if you take a look at the efficiency angle, I think efficiency ultimately is going to be a function of analytics and a function of even artificial intelligence. A lot can be done around that. So for me, these will be the pillars.
Yeah. Perfect. Francois?
To complement that, I think, I fully agree with that. I think, on top of that, there are a lot of potential new technologies which are being used. But I think one we tend to forget as well is that a lot of technologies are already existing, but not used, or not used on a very large scale. One of them, I think, what I have in mind clearly is waste. Sewage. We can use, for example, our technologies can use TSE. You could produce more TSE instead of like desalinated water. We can use TSE instead. In terms of energy, we can't avoid waste. Okay, at the moment. The zero waste target is something that I don't think I will be able ever to see in my life, but hopefully maybe for future generations. But still, we have waste. And that waste can be used, so waste to energy projects, where we also as an industry can come into play, because we can use some of the heat that is generated to then generate cooling or even heating. I'm talking for my industry generally, district cooling and district heating. This is commonly used in many other places in the world, namely in Europe, for example. I think that has to come as well in this region, that there is a fantastic potential to improve efficiencies and recover energy instead of wasting it.
Thank you.
Concerning waste, before talking about energy, what's ridiculous is that 100 years ago, or even before, we used to not have waste. The more we are going forward, the more we are having waste, and we are incapable of dealing with it. We created for ourselves needs, and we are not ready to lower them. Anyway, I think one of the most sustainable ways to deal with the future is to see again our lifestyles re-question this modern lifestyle, overconsumption lifestyle. And concerning the technologies, I think biomimicry would be a very, very interesting domain that could be very fruitful, and that mimifying what already things, because I consider that all our solutions already exist in nature. So just looking deeply what already is existing, and trying to redo the same with high technology, creating like nano canvas or like elliptic systems or that are optimized, because everything is optimized in nature, would increase the efficiency and would make us be more cyclic with nature, more circular, more fluid. And also concerning the designs of the building, I think there's a a very big role in sustainability in the design, even before the intervention of technology, which is based on, as we see today, like approximately a lot of buildings are fully covered with glass, for example. And this is like they are only relying on heating and cooling, and then they talk about making heating and cooling in this technology efficient. First, don't put glass in the building, reduce the glass, then you will automatically reduce your consumption. So there's things that should be done even before going to the technology, to asking technology for help.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. And Benjamin, last one. We've already run over.
Okay, so look, I think in the building industry, usually the path of least resistance is followed.
Yeah.
What is cheapest and easiest tends to rule the day, and I think that we don't have a technological problem. There's technologies out there in this hall that are solving many of these problems. The problem that we have here in the region, I think, is legislation. There is not enough of a framework of legislation demanding that it is a requirement to build in a sustainable way, which may be sometimes more expensive. It may, to some extent, slow the pace of development. But I think the long-term benefits are huge. I think that the built infrastructure of our cities will be vastly improved. It will last that much longer, and it will help the region to become to essentially reverse its reputation as being one of the least sustainable societies or collections of society in the world to being one of the most sustainable. And I think we're really right on the cusp of that kind of change. And I hope that the government understands that it cannot come from free market economy alone. There should be legislation that really pushes that market and creates all sorts of opportunities for people to profit from doing the right thing and making good quality, sustainable buildings for our future.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We have a question. I'm not sure if we have time for questions. Yep, okay, we do. There's a microphone coming out. Just over here.
Good morning, everyone. Maybe it's almost afternoon or noon time. I have done a research. I am Azzuddin Ziud. I am working currently with the Ministry of Energy on a program for innovation. And what we just realized, that's the biggest need for the current construction is as a government, if the government develop the legislation and enforce one single platform, and that platform will integrate all technology together, evolving technologies, so that this platform will save everyone's life in terms of contractors and architecture and developers and everyone. Do you think, if I am a government body or a semi-government body, do you think if I give and enforce one platform with the legislation, this will accelerate the construction industry minimum 10 years?
Was that directed at a specific panelist, or can anyone answer that?
I think this gentleman.
At Benjamin?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it could make a difference, and it is making a difference actually. Whether it's the Estidama system or the LEED system, etc. I think the issue is that it's a bit of a gray area how mandated these things are, and as you mentioned, the fact that we have many. The different emirates with the different systems, and there's a level of independence between the various cities that it can be a bit confusing as a consultant, as a developer, to navigate all of that. I think things are going in the right direction, but there's been too many meetings that I've been at where people are more concerned with the tick box approach, I suppose. We put the bicycle storage deep in the basement, tick. This is not really what it's about. I think the nice thing about the Estidama is that it is to some extent modeled very specifically for this region, and there is the lead developed for the Middle East. And I think this is going in the right direction, but it is not mandated across all buildings. It tends to be for the larger scale and more kind of iconic projects. But if you look at the actual energy and water and waste footprint of our cities, it's the buildings that don't have architects, that don't have consultants, the self-build, the vast swathes of villa developments that are very unregulated. And I think we need to look at how to control and improve on the sort of architecture without architects end of the spectrum.
I'll just add a comment there. If you've got the government looking at mandating a platform, that's obviously going to benefit. But what's going to pull that whole thing backwards and probably take it way below where you are is if that body decided to mandate it entirely on their own without taking private sector participation in. So, the balance that's required there is to surely mandate, but the mandates have to come from, a panel or, let's say a kind of an association that can collaborate first and come up with what's best for the region. A mandate that's singularly stressed could just set things back, because you'd probably drive your costs up because you're not aware of what's available, what's relevant, what needs to be developed further. So you've developed a mandate, but it's probably not going to be catered to well enough by what's available.
Yeah, I think I'll just add one more thing as well. So stakeholder collaboration in terms of the private sector, but also intergovernmental collaboration as well. We've often found that government bodies are not collaborating sufficiently within the government. So you have kind of the body that's in charge of reducing the energy consumption, improving energy efficiency, aren't necessarily always directly involved with or collaborating with the body responsible for the legislation. So it's also it's private sector engagement and also intergovernmental collaboration to make sure that all stakeholders are involved in that process. Yeah, one more question here. Oh, no more questions. Sorry. Done?
Yeah,
okay.
there's
all right.
more,
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thank you to everyone for listening. I think extremely interesting panel, and we could have spoken for hours. Thank you.